The second issue that comes up is making assumptions without modeling business drivers, assuming growth rates directly in the sales numbers or cash flow numbers or cost numbers, right? Now, what this does is that the growth rates used are completely out of sync for business dynamics. It is integral to know how many cars a company will produce and what price they will be able to charge in terms of the model, right? You can't really create a model without this dynamic. I can take the sales number and assume a growth to that, but the reality is I have to first figure out what is going to be the volume of sales, assume a growth in that based on my understanding, and then I have to assume what is the realization per unit. And I have to assume a growth or a degrowth number for that as well. Unless I bring in these two dynamics, I could either overestimate or underestimate my overall dynamic of sales. Volume projections are an integral part. And they also become important in almost all production companies, because otherwise this will lead to other errors such as inconsistent calculation of cost numbers or capex numbers, right? If we directly assume growth in sales value, it will create a problem sooner or later because the company may not be growing volume at that rate. Two-wheelers, for example, in India at this point of time, volume growth is going to stop. So either you move towards a realization growth kind of a model, or you try and get volume growth using exports because the domestic market seems to be getting saturated, right? That's the issue that comes if you go about building assumptions without modeling the business drivers. How do you address this? Assume that you are running the business and you are giving a budget to your team. How would you go about creating this? Right? Think about it. If there is a company, let's say this is a cement company. If you're building your assumptions for next year, you're giving a budget to your team. You can't just go about saying that I want a sales of these many rupees crore next year. You have to say we have to sell this many million tons of cement, and depending on what the price is, we will arrive at a multiplication of these two to get the revenue numbers. In fact, in some of the commodity industries, it is absolutely critical that you do the volume growth rate assumption, because the price assumption is given by the market. Steel prices, cement prices, they are defined by what the price is in the market. You don't really have a say in that. So you can't really project price as such. You have to take an assumption saying, okay, prices will be under pressure this year and for the steel industry because China is under pressure and China is kind of creating that pressure. You have to go about figuring out how many million tons can we sell or can the company sell, and then base your projections based on that, right? You can't have structures based here. There is another issue that comes in unless you project volume growth, especially for manufacturing companies, is that costs assumptions as percentage of sales value, which is commonly what happens, is a wrong assumption, right? My costs, let's say raw material cost as a percentage of sales, if I was producing 100 cars at a price of 4 lakhs each, right? That basically gives me 400 lakhs as the revenue. If I increase the price to 5 lakhs, my revenue goes to 500 lakhs or 5 crores, right? If I'm taking the cost of raw material as percentage of sales value, I will assume an increase in the value of raw materials, cost of raw materials as well, regardless of whether that actually happens, right? So my cost of raw material should be based on my sales volume and not my sales value. For that, I do need to project the sales value in the sales volume in the first place. Without that, it will not be correct, right? So that's the second instance that would create a problem. So if you look at this, essentially the revenue from operations has to come in from an assumptions of how many cars will get sold, domestic versus exports in the future, what kind of growth rates can be assumed there, and what is going to be the realization per vehicle sold. That becomes important, remember, because diesel cars sell for a higher price. You see a big uptick in 2013 for realization per vehicle. Over a period that the combination of cars sold again changes, so you don't see any increase in realizations. Technically they should be able to increase realizations, but they're not able to do that here, right? And that's because again they're selling more petrol cars as compared to diesel cars. So it's important to arrive at an understanding of the realizations as well as the volumes before you arrive at the revenue number. Otherwise, the revenue number is incomplete, right? That's the second issue that comes typically with valuation of modeling drivers.